My name is Scott Anderson, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at JANA. I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar titled Creating and Delivering Quality CMMs in S1000D. At JANA, we have a long history of managing and delivering S1000D data, and we have some of the brightest minds in the business running the show for us. Two of those brightest minds are going to be your speakers today. First of all, we've got with us Don Bridges. Don is JANA's XML Consulting Manager. Many of you in attendance probably know Don, partly because he seems to know everybody, and partly because he's spent more than 20 years in the XML industry. And during that time, he's acquired a wealth of industry knowledge and insight, and you get to share in some of that knowledge today via this webinar. Also with us, we've got Jeff LaFonzi, who has spent over 30 years managing aircraft tech pubs, and he was one of the early adopters of S1000D in the civil aviation space. JANA is very fortunate to have people like Don and Jeff working for us, and they're very much looking forward to sharing some of their S1000D expertise with you today. For those of you who might not know about JANA, JANA is a privately held company. We've been around for about 44 years, and we always have specialized in the writing and editing and management and publishing and delivery of technical data. It's been our bread and butter, like I said, for 44 years. Right now, we have about 170 total tech writers and graphic illustrators. Before I go ahead and turn things over to Don and Jeff, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those questions through the chat function in your webinar control panel. I'll be collecting those questions as we go through the webinar, and Don and Jeff will answer as many of them as they can before we close. Also, I'm going to be recording today's webinar, and within a few days I'm going to post that recording on our website. You can access the this webinar recording or the recordings of any of our other recorded webinars at www.janacorp.com/webinars. So check it out if you have interest in tech pubs and the like. There's a lot of information there for you. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Don and Jeff. Guys?
Thank you, Scott. This is Don Bridges, and in case you're wondering that for the photo of me on the couple slides back, I was the guy in last place. So, you know, it's maybe a cyclist, but an old cyclist. But what you're going to learn today, and what hopefully we'll spend the next, let's say, 30 minutes or so on, is talking about S1000D from a high-level overview, that what you need to learn, at least from the 30,000 foot level, of what it takes. What does an S1000D system look like? Why are the OEMs going to S1000D? And, you know, by the way, I'll mention that, you know, the best strategy may be to stay where you're at, as weird as it sounds. A couple of notes that I'm going to add. First of all, this is a high-level overview. There is a tremendous amount to S1000D. I've provided a link to the spec. It's 3,500 pages. If you can't get to sleep one night, this might do the trick. Secondly, we will mention some specific tools, some specific technologies. Just because we mention a tool doesn't mean we endorse it. So with that in mind, going over today's agenda, we would like to go over the current situation as we hear about it in the industry, the benefits of S1000D, why is the industry moving in that direction. I'm going to ask Jeff to help us understand what does an S1000D system look like from both a technology stack perspective and a process perspective. And then we'll get into providing you with the options that you have and some of the variables that go along with that option. And then maybe focus on some lessons learned. We've been working with S1000D for north of 20 years, maybe 25 years. I think the spec has been around since mid-late 80s. But some things that we've learned, some unique challenges, some FAQs, things like that. And then we'll turn the presentation essentially back over to you. and allow you to go ask questions that we'll try to answer. I'll warn you, the tough ones we're going to have Jeff answer. And if you have a question, go ahead and write it down now in using the chat function. Send it on to Scott, and we will circle back to it at the end of the presentation. Before we go, Scott, can I have you administer a survey question to help us understand what is the technology that various organizations are using?
Absolutely. For the attendees, you should see pop up on your screen a quick poll question. If you could answer that poll question for us, we'll give you a second or two to look over it. What authoring technology does your organization currently use to create CMMs? The options, of course, are MS Word, Adobe FrameMaker, some XML editor, such as Arbortext or XMetal or Oxygen, or something else.
Scott, do you think I should play a little theme music while the people are filling out the survey just for a second?
Absolutely.
All right. I'll see if we can get the orchestra queued up.
It looks like the responses are slowing down. It looks like it's pretty close in the leaders between MS Word and others, which is interesting, with Adobe FrameMaker coming in sort of a close third, and it doesn't look like anybody in our audience is using an XML editor to create CMMs. So that's interesting. But about 38% or so using MS Word, about the same for other.
Huh. And so I guess I would, you know, when we were putting this together, thinking and talking with industry, if you filled in other, if you could in the chat box just let us know what that is. We're not going to call you out, but just for our edification, it would be helpful to know what other is. So if you don't mind, that would be great. So here was the trying to being a little bit of a soothsayer, and most from what we hear talking with industry, most CMMs are authored in Word or FrameMaker. So I'm kind of close, but then there's the other folks out there that I'm not quite sure what that is. Most CMMs are, when you're creating them, you're saving them on a file system as a monolithic Word or monolithic FrameMaker document, and you're publishing and delivering as Adobe PDF. And so that's typically how the world is. But I guess over the last maybe 5 years, I've heard there are various levels of encouragement coming from the OEMs that said, we would certainly like you to deliver S1000D. And they basically want your content to be plug and play with their content, meaning they'll insert it. Currently, sometimes they will have to retype it, rekey it, redraw it, extract it, convert it. And S1000D really lends itself to saying, okay, if you provide your content in this format, in this data model, we can insert it into our publication, our being the OEMs, and with a very minimal amount of rework that has to be done. So maybe, you know, that is in itself being able to go reuse your data, and reuse I'm talking about in two different ways. One is the interoperability, saying that if you deliver data to their specifications, to their standards, they can insert it directly. And then also for you, the content creator, you can go reuse content because S1000D is what we call a modular data model. If you want to think of Lego blocks, and with Lego blocks, you can go build a boat or a ship or a plane or whatever with the same basic chunks of plastic in the Lego world, in data in your world. So if you have content that is repeated across multiple products, you can go reuse that content because you're expressing the same idea the exact same way, because it is the same content. You improve the consistency. And you lower your content creation and revision costs because you say, hey, you know, I've already got some of this already built. And so you can reuse that and lower the cost to go create content. Also, because it's XML, there's something called multiple channel delivery that says, hey, you can still deliver content as PDF, but you can also deliver it in interactive electronic tech manuals or items. There are third-party apps that are available for people to access. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but being able to kind of break out of the, well, it's PDF or FrameMaker or nothing to, if you want it on a mobile device and it to look slick, you can do that. If you want an item, you can do that. So it really opens up a lot of doors. So what I would like to do is maybe have Jeff walk you through the S1000D technology from a technology perspective and also from a process perspective. Jeff, can you pick up the next couple of slides for me?
Sure. So typically S1000D files are managed within a common source database, and data modules are the unit of which procedures and part listings and wiring are contained in and assembled as a, more or less a task procedure. Images are combined with those via references into those data modules. Graphics are edited externally in the graphic editor, and these data modules, in the case of a component manual or a release, are then issued in a DDN, which is a data dispatch note, and then uploaded to a system or a portal, or it can be uploaded to the end user through that device, and then they're viewed in an XML editor.
So Jeff, maybe a question here. Is a data module the same as what we would think of in the ATA world as a task or a subtask, or is there a one-to-one correlation between how data is the hierarchical structure in S1000D versus ATA, or is it kind of, but not really?
So it can be either. Typically, we're seeing the OEMs use a data module to represent a task in the case of a procedural document, or in the case of an IPC or parts data as a what used to be traditionally a figure. However, there's nothing to preclude it from being used down to a subtask level, and you'll see that in some of the other documents like minimum equipment lists and that.
Okay. So what about the process? What does the workflow look like?
Okay, so this process really illustrates a parts buildup in a startup process for a project, and the OEMs normally provide a Brex, which is a business rules that are in digital format and intended to be interpreted by a computer system. And those rules contain, there's a lot of optional use within S1000D, and it contains details about the numbering systems used and the definition values and certain things about how the content is written. So those are placed into the computer system where the authoring takes place. Generally, the stack of drawings is provided, and we develop a provisioning data, and that provisioning data is accompanied with graphics where, similar to an IPC, the graphics call-outs are established and identifying the parts, and that parts list is initiated, and that's known as a initial provisioning project number. And then there's a lot of interactivity with the OEM in this case. So that data is then sent to the OEM. When that's broken down, the OEM will either accept it or reject it, And then from there, what we would call a book plan is created, and that's known as a DMRL, or a data module requirements listing. So it identifies what data modules are required to make up that section of data, or traditionally what would be a book, and that is submitted. In this case, this represents one OEM, this swim chart here. And that's once again submitted to the OEM. They accept or reject it. And when that's accepted, the actual data modules, or the finished product, is created. The graphics are then married up with that, and that's submitted as the hopefully final product to the OEM through this DDM, or data dispatch node.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the options to go help you walk through that process? And these are really the four main options that we're aware of. And I've tried to break it down into where is the work done, where does the data reside, what is your turnaround time, what is the impact on your process or workflows, what are the amounts of training, and what are the amounts of IT support you'll need. And so these are certainly, rough numbers, and I'm going to give you credit for being able to go read a slide accurately and read a table accurately. But if you want the work to be done on site, you're probably looking at one of the two options on the right, either an on-premise tool or a hosted cloud-based tool. And then, can the data go off-site? And for some of you, you have the attitude, have the rule, your business rule, my data cannot go off-site. And so that kind of forces you into a on-premise tool. Maybe a note about turnaround, in that how long do these things take? And that is, you'll notice on the previous slide that there were several checkpoints for the OEM to approve, whether it's the provisioning list, whether it's the book plan, the DMRL, or it's actually the collection of data modules, graphics, IPLs that you have. And that approval is not always instantaneous. As a matter of fact, it's never instantaneous. It can sometimes take hours, and sometimes take days, and sometimes take, we've even had situations where it's, I guess, weeks for a specific manual on that checkpoint to be approved. So when I say as fast as you want, you can go do the work as fast as you want, but that doesn't mean the OEM is going to go approve what you've submitted. And then if there are revisions to it, you have to go back up and figure out, okay, what's wrong. As far as the cost, which is the top line, I didn't want to say, put it in dollars, but these are kind of typical amounts of hours to go do, convert, or to go write a data module. And you'll notice the graphics is both the same, and that's because I'm assuming that in both cases you're starting with an engineering model. And we'll talk a little bit about graphics in a second. As far as on-premise tool, I guess as cheap as inexpensive as we've seen them is $70,000, $80,000. But the rule of thumb is that between server licenses and configuration and authoring tools and graphics tools and maybe simplified technical English tools, it's probably going to be at a minimum $150,000 by the time you add it all up, unless you're very good at doing the configuration yourself and maybe have some of the tools already in place. So that is maybe the high-level overview, and as Scott mentioned, we will make a recording. We will make these slides available, so you can come back. And this isn't meant to decide for you what is the right option, but maybe kind of point you in one direction or the other. So what are the tool options? And while I will say that these are kind of the mainstream tool options, this is not meant to say that these are the only options, and clearly they're not. But these are the ones that we run across more in industry that seem to be more current, seem to be more in use. And I think while people that have worked with S1000D and have had access to more than one tool, they have their personal favorites. What works best for, it's like, what's the best vehicle? Well, I drive a pickup truck, but somebody else may drive a car, and it's just the preference of what works for you. But I've listed the URLs. I've tried to also list what is the authoring tool that is predominantly used. I think with all of these software solutions, these are primarily, you think of as the CSDB and the Brex builder and things like that. But there is a authoring aspect to it, and whether you're using on-prem or hosted, whether you want to use their technology or use another one that may have less functionality, but hey, I'm more comfortable with it, I already have it. There is the option to go use Structured FrameMaker, and I've listed Mecon as a source for that tool, and there's YouTube videos of it, and you can see it being used, and we've seen it used, and it seems to work well if the thought of angle brackets is a little daunting. Jeff, anything that you want to add on this one? All right.
No, sir. I think you've covered it well.
All right. Perfect. So a couple slides between the unique challenges and FAQs and lessons learned and things like that. And I'm going to touch on maybe several of these points a couple of times because I think they're important. One of those is Simplified Technical English, and it is part of the S1000D standard. It is certainly recommended. It is required by some OEMs, maybe like Airbus. And there are tools that will help you take your writing, and if you're not familiar with Simplified Technical English, it's a webinar to itself, but it's basically writing for clarity, writing for consistency, and you can do it manually. My opinion, it works better with a tool that will go back and check and make sure that there is a consistent voice, consistent terms, and a clear presentation of the information. Graphics, the requirements vary depending on what OEM you're supplying your information to. Invariably they are vector formats. The two vector formats that we hear most often are SVG, Scalable Vector Graphic, and CGM, Computer Graphic Metafile, I think is the acronym. Most engineering CAD systems will allow you to output the graphics and from their engineering CAD drawing into an SVG or CGM, and there's also companies that make utilities that will go do that for you. And more about graphics in a second. Jeff talked a little bit about business rules, and business rules, for instance, a business rule could be all content will meet ASD 100, I think it's ASD 100 standard for Simplified Technical English. That's kind of a simple one. A more complex one is we will not allow numbered list inside a note. I don't know why you have that business rule, but it might be one. So, and Brex is basically those business rules that were written in plain English, but now let's make them computer readable. So they are typically supplied by the OEM, but not always. And it's difficult when they're not. You certainly should request and throw a tantrum if the OEM doesn't supply the Brex, but it is what it is. And here's one that's just absolutely crazy in my book is that they can change mid-project, that an OEM will change the Brex, which will mean that what was valid in, let's call it version 1, is not valid in version 2, so you'll have to go back and tweak things. The good news is that in uploading files for approval, it is a multi-stage process. It's not a big bang where you don't know if you've got it right till at the end. Typically there are steps that say, okay, let's go make this part is right, and then let's go make that part is right, and make sure that you're on track. So the FAQs are as I like to think of them, but what about And first of all is data security. And invariably, the content that you're creating will be uploaded through your OEM's web portal. And it is built with security in mind. I know that a lot of people are saying, whoa, you know, I'm delivering XML, they can change XML. And it's like, yeah, that's right. And they'll say, well, but when we deliver PDF, boom, you know, that's what it is. And it's like, well, yeah, kind of. I can go change a PDF, and you can go change a PDF. But with comparison of XML files is really something that is straightforward, so you can keep a record of what was submitted. And then if there's some discrepancy, you can go do a comparison and say, or did they change something? It's very easy to go compare XML files. Because S1000D is a modular data model, you kind of need to look at your data differently in that maybe you, instead of generalists, you have specialists, and that people that only focus on certain aspects because they're creating their own data modules or their own graphics that might be used in several places. So it is a kind of a different way of looking at things. And then content delivery. Most people have PDF, and you can still create PDF from S1000D and make it look doggone close to what you're doing in an ATA kind of world. But the OEM is going to want your XML files. And there is the nice shiny side that if you want to go deliver, and the reason I say HTML5 is it's a more intelligent version of HTML that allows for dynamic rendering. So if you're looking on a tablet, you might render it differently than you would on a iPhone, and might render differently than you would render on a desktop. And you can have things like secure access, meaning that I'm only going to allow access to these people, and these people I'm only going to allow access to these parts of my information. And faceted search and customer feedback that, hey, you know, boy, this process is wrong, or you know, you goofed this one, or whatever. So just a lot of things that you can do with dynamic delivery that I think you'll see the industry going without the full-on expense of an IEDM. Certainly the OEMs might want the expense of an IEDM, interactive electronic manual. And then finally, you know, what are the lessons learned that we've seen, and maybe highlight 3 of them. And on the issue of graphics, just to clarify, engineering graphics are created for engineering. They're not created for tech pubs, and that's you might say, well, gosh, well, why is that a problem? And it's like, well, most OEMs will define a color palette that they want you to use, and by won't, they will insist that you use their color palette. They will insist that certain areas be shaded or not shaded, and for a object to be shaded, you have to fill in all the sides of that surface. It typically, coming from engineering, they aren't, because that's not, they're trying to convey an image, not trying to go shade a graphic, shade a surface. So there is a lot of work that goes on into getting graphics acceptable to be S1000D graphics. And please don't blame me. It is what it is. Talking about process, you going from a monolithic approach to a modular approach. And it's a different way of looking at things. It's a different workflow, certainly, than I think you use now. Basically, now you create it and send it, and it's all approved. And now there are these checkpoints along the way. And then in the issue of conversion, it would make life easier for everybody if we could just, you know, convert the Word to XML, and there's utilities that do that, and they're swell, but it's really more of a deconstruction of the content into specific data modules and reconstruction into the data modules. So it's converting from Word to XML, but it's also a deconstruction and a reconstruction project. So there is a lot of hands-on effort to go do that, which is why it's 2-3 hours per data module, 2-3 hours per task, if you want to think of it that way. So right at the bottom of the hour, that was about 30 minutes. What I would like to do is turn things back over to Scott and have him field whatever questions that you have. And If you would like to contact us directly, we're both at the phone number at JANA, which is just outside of San Antonio. But by email, you can reach us at these email addresses. And I certainly, and I think I speak for Jeff, if you like the presentation, let me know why. We're giving a presentation for ATA for people that are looking to go to ATA, to an XML ATA system, 2 weeks from today. And maybe some things that you didn't like, I'll figure out a way to tweak for next time. So if you liked it, let me know, and if you didn't like it, let me know. I sincerely appreciate your feedback. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott.
Okay, thank you, Don. We actually had 2 questions submitted. The first one, we have an excellent question from one of our attendees, which kind of combines 2 of our favorite topic-based specifications. And that question is, what is the difference between the CSDB used as a repository for S1000D content and the CCMS used as a repository for DITA content?
Jeff, you want me to
Yes, please.
Yeah, and so in all fairness, Jeff is really focused on our aerospace and aviation business, and so when the subject of DITA comes up, I'm sure Jeff knows what it is, and so for those of you that don't know, DITA is a modular DTD data model that is used by a lot of companies outside of the aerospace industry, and even in some cases inside the aerospace industry, but typically outside. So if you go to a software company, if you go to a large manufacturing company, invariably they're using DITA. And so the role of a CSDB and a CCMS is exactly the same. So very good question, very good observation. The difference is that in a S1000D world, you have things like BREX, and you have these that basically are applying information in addition to the DTD. Whereas in DITA, there is no BREX. You have to, that is assumed accounted for in the DTD. So that's really the big difference. They both accept modular content. They both accept chunks of information, if I go back to my Lego block illustration. But you'll typically see DITA in non-aerospace maintenance information, and in aerospace maintenance information, it has been for many years. ATA is now going to S1000D, but really they are very similar. And if you, let me go back to this slide, SDL, the product that SDL has is called Knowledge Center. And it does a great job with DITA content. So it's the Contina S1000D has its brother in Knowledge Center to go handle DITA. Arbortext, in both cases, uses Windchill as the repository. So whether it's S1000D or whether it's DITA. And I don't think the other 4 companies have a foot in the DITA world. So, very good question.
Thank you. And then the second question, Don, at one point you had mentioned simplified technical English tools, and somebody was wondering, are there automated options for creating simplified technical English narratives, or are the tools just for validation?
The tools, and since I was mentioning tools for the other technologies, the 2 that we see most often are a tool called Acrolinx, and cleverly the name of the company is Acrolinx, ACROLINX, and a company called Ediplan that has a tool called Hyper STE, or Hyper Simplified Technical English. And like I said, I think STE is swell, and being an engineer by training, I will be the first to admit that I am tortured by the English language, and I don't maybe write things in the clearest of manners, and it will go and look at both tools, will look at the text that's written and will potentially suggest something. If I'm using acronyms, it will make sure have you spelled out what the acronym is. It will make sure that you're always speaking in third-person voice, that you're not mixing in we suggest or I suggest or anything like that, that from a ASD 100 standard is completely unacceptable. Obviously, you can go use spell check. So, these things can be done if you're very, very, if you're not tortured by the English language, you might want to be able to do it yourself. But both the Acrolinks and the Hyper SDE tools do a nice job and are used by aerospace companies to go make sure that the intent of STE, or Simplified Technical English, is incorporated.
Don, one of our attendees pointed out that Boeing also has a Simplified Technical English checker called BSEC, which I quickly Googled, and it just stands for Boeing Simplified English Checker. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Oh, good. See, even I learned something. And yeah, I don't know, I haven't seen that tool and haven't used that tool. Jeff, I don't know if that's something that you have experience with or not.
We are aware of it. I don't have a lot of experience with it.
But yeah, I guess my overriding thought with all these things is if you have technology in place or can get technology or leverage what you have, well, that's great. I'm the last person to go, sadly, to go say, "Oh, technology solves all your problems." It certainly might make life easier, but you also have to make sure that the processes are aligned to your business rules and your business goals, and your people are trained on how to use it. I mean, I had software packages that I thought, "Ooh, Photoshop. I'm going to go learn how to use Photoshop," and never got trained on it, and consequently, that was a complete waste of the price of Photoshop because I never bothered to go learn it. So there's the tool aspect, which is really doggone important. There's the process aspect, and there's the training aspect. And neglecting one really is a big mistake.